Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome back. Nice to see all of you guys. Sawadee Kap, Sawadee Kap, Sawadee Kap. Nice to see all of you guys. We're going to go ahead and get started since it's 6:30. I know some of you guys are just coming in from the elephants, so maybe there's some things you guys are chatting about, but we're going to get started with our evening. This evening, what I'm going to do is have you guys do walking meditation. If you'd like to practice that, it's really up to you. It's your choice. That's what the plan was, is to have you guys do walking meditation, but it's really your choice. It's your life, your decisions, your results. If you'd like to do some other position, it's totally up to you. But if we can clear out some floor space for the walking meditation, then afterwards, I'm going to teach you the 5 precepts. So welcome back to all of you guys, and let's start with our meditation. So if you guys would like to start the same way we did this morning, where we have a circle going around the room. I'll do the same thing, is I'll get you guys started like I did this morning, and then I'll just leave you guys to do your meditation. So we're facing this way, and the people who would like to walk a little bit faster can be on the outside. People who are walking a little bit slower, you can stay on the inside. You can have your hands either in front or beside or behind you, and you like to look 1 meter in front of you down at the ground, or 3 feet. And now stare at that fixed spot with your eyes, and then just put your foot out to do flat, and then transfer. Flat, transfer. Flat, transfer. Flat, transfer. Flat, transfer. Flat, transfer. Flat, transfer. Now you guys keep going, and at some point you can drop off that flat transfer. Okay, if you guys would like to rejoin the classroom, we'll start our class. Cecile, can you take this? Yeah, thank you. Getting ready, right? Okay, now that you guys have had a chance to do this twice, I'd like to pause here and see if there's any questions that you have on walking meditation. Yes, sir.
When you walk and your eyes dry out, should you blink?
Sure, why not?
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions about this meditation? Mm-hmm.
The walking gotta be like slightly slow, or it can be like fast.
You would like to be nice, slow, steady, consistent pace. If you're walking fast, your mind's going to be fast. So because your mind is fixated through your eyes, you're trying to slow the mind down. Sometimes people think like a fast mind is good, but that's not the case, because you would like to slow the mind down so you can think through all your decisions, make wise decisions, and experience wholesome results. So by slowing your walk down, it'll slow your mind down because your mind is fixated to the walking.
And could it be more beneficial if before doing the walking meditation, maybe to do something to be really tired?
You should never be tired when you're doing meditation, because your mind needs to be active and attentive during the meditation, whether it's walking or any other style of meditation. You would like your mind to be attentive and alert, so you're not interested in being tired before meditating.
Okay, maybe not tired like mentally, but like physically, because I don't know, maybe when I'm walking like so slow, I'm thinking like it would be nice to walk faster. So maybe if my body is tired, that it could become easier to walk slower.
The issue there is the mind craving to walk fast. So that's the whole reason why this is so helpful for you, because the mind wants to walk fast. It's not comfortable walking slow. So you're not going to be able to trick the mind by making the body tired, but you need to be able to slow the mind down. And that's why this kind of thing can feel very uncomfortable when you're first getting started with it, because the mind doesn't want to do it. It's like a wild animal, and you're coming in and trying to train this wild animal, and now the wild animal's like, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. So as you do it, it'll slow your mind down and it'll get more and more comfortable.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh, more questions. Yep.
So can you explain a little bit more about what we're supposed to do with our visual field? So do we like focus 100% on what's in front of us, 1 meter in front of us, or do we just have like a relaxed awareness?
Definitely focus 1 meter in front of you, and then anytime the mind moves off of that, you bring it back. That's your post and your pillar. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. So I understand you guys had some good fun at the elephants. Is that true? Did you guys have a good time? Yeah, for those of you guys that went, yeah? Okay. I'm organizing the vans for tomorrow for the orphanage. So I'd like to see if there's people who are interested in going to the orphanage. Tomorrow, what our plan is I'm going to be teaching you guys some teachings in the morning, of course, with our meditation. And there's going to be 2 talks in the morning. But then at some point, we're going to break and go have lunch close by here. And then we were I'm planning to go to the store and buy a bunch of supplies for the orphanage, like food. That's pretty much what they need. And then go to the orphanage, spend time there, and donate the food for them, and then come back. And we should have time when we get back for food. We'll see. We never know. Even though I plan it to be one way, it can always be another way. But it's always nice to go out and see and practice some generosity. See some people that are having some challenges and learn about their life and things like this. So if you guys would like to go, if I can get a count, because then I'll know how much transportation to get. So can I see hands? And then maybe you guys can count off. 1, 2. Are you 3? Okay. 13. Okay, and I'll be 14. Okay, so we'll see if we can fit into one van. So we have 14 people. Okay, so I'll tell you guys more about the orphanage tomorrow, kind of the history of it a little bit, and how we prepare to go to the store and all this kind of stuff. But I'll organize the transportation so I'll have it here ready for us. So tonight's talk that I'm going to share with you guys plugs into the Eightfold Path of what we discussed this morning. It's called the 5 Precepts. This is a householder's guide to daily practice. This is 5 important topics of things that you could make decisions about, either wisely or unwisely, and it's either going to produce wholesome results or unwholesome results. Sometimes people have been taught that the Buddha taught no killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, no lying, and no intoxicants, and this isn't what he actually taught on this important topic. I'm going to show you his actual words so you can see what he actually taught, because he gives much more illuminating language on this that's going to help inform you of what you're doing with these precepts. And these precepts and all the other teachings that he shares, it's helping you eliminate that craving, anger, and ignorance that we talked about yesterday evening. Remember, those are the pollutions of the mind that are hindering the mind from experiencing the brightness and the radiance and the joy of the enlightened mind, where the mind can be peaceful and joyful permanently, where the mind can eliminate its discontent feelings, having that focus and concentration and clarity and deep memory. So here, these teachings, they're not rules, they're not commandments. The Buddha doesn't teach that way. He doesn't have rules. He doesn't have this black and white. So I'm going to teach it to you using the words of the Buddha, and then I'm going to show you how to apply it in day-to-day life. And it's important to understand that he's helping you to understand this natural law of karma, of cause and effect, or action and result. So I'm not here to tell anybody what they should or shouldn't be doing in their life. You're an adult. You can make any decisions that you like. And it's not my place to tell you what you should or shouldn't do. But I can explain to you the natural law of karma, where you can see the cause and effect. And then based on that wisdom, you make whatever decision you think is best for you. So I'm going to help you to understand what these precepts are using his words. And then we're going to relate it to day-to-day experiences and decisions that you're going to be making and maybe confronted with. But at that point, you make whatever decision you think is best for you. The first one here is abandoning the taking of life, refraining from taking life, without stick or sword, diligent, compassionate, trembling for the welfare of all living beings. So remember, with the teachings of the Buddha, you're always learning, investigating, and examining his teachings. You're then reflecting to independently verify, and then you're practicing. That's where the real results come in, when you're actually practicing his teachings. So whenever you come across a teaching like this where you're learning it, you need to examine it and investigate it. And the first thing you come to understand is that he's talking about living beings here. So you need to know, what is a living being? And we talked about this a bit this morning with the 5 aggregates. That's how you understand what is a living being, because what he's teaching you is to live compassionately for all living beings. So the first thing you need to know is, how do I determine what is a living being? You shouldn't even assume that you know how to determine what is or isn't a living being. So there's 5 aggregates, or 5 collections, or 5 elements, or 5 criteria that make a living being a living being. They have physical form, they have feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, and a consciousness. What physical form is the physical form, and you can reflect on this as I'm teaching it to you because you know that you're a living being, and you can verify that what I'm teaching you is true, that a living being is going to have physical form. They're going to have feelings, those pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant. They're going to have perceptions, which are views and opinions about the world. They're going to have volitional formations, which are choices and decisions. Essentially, they're going to have free will. They're going to be able to make their own decisions about life. And then they're going to have a consciousness, which is the mind, right? So you can see that a human being, a squirrel, a rabbit, an ant, a snake, these are all living beings. And then you can see something like this chair that I'm sitting in. You can see that it's not a living being. It does have physical form, but it doesn't have feelings. It doesn't have perceptions, views, and opinions about the world. It doesn't have choices and decisions. It can't choose to pick itself up, walk down the street, and set itself back down. And it doesn't have a consciousness. So this is how you determine what is or isn't a living being. And you can see through this that bacteria and viruses, they're not a living being. You can see that a plant is not a living being. And this is where oftentimes we use language with our lack of wisdom to say things like, I'm going to kill this bacteria in my body, or I'm going to, don't kill that tree, or don't kill that plant. Well, we're not really killing a plant. We're harvesting it. And that's true reality. But with the mind's lack of wisdom, it will tend to use language that doesn't really represent that true reality. Or we'll say things like, I'm going to kill this bacteria in the body. In reality, we're eliminating this bacteria from the body. And as I mentioned this morning, not only can you see this through the 5 aggregates, that these things aren't living beings, but you can see it through the natural law of gamma, of cause and effect, or action and result. Because anytime you're causing harm to a living being, this harm is going to come back to you. And if you were killing a bacteria, that means that you would be experiencing harm if that was a living being. But when we eliminate a bacteria from the body, we actually experience wholesome results. We experience wholesome gamma. Or when we harvest a broccoli, we experience wholesome results. We need to be able to harvest plants, but then we also need to plant them too. That's something that we've learned over the years, that if we're harvesting a bunch of trees, then we need to plant a bunch as well. That's where the harm was coming in, is that we weren't planting trees. That's the harm that we were causing. So we need to be able to harvest and then plant. So this is the way that you determine what a living being is, because the Buddha is teaching you to live compassionately. So you need to know what this word compassion is. Compassion is the concern for the misfortune of others. This is a mental state that you cultivate in the mind. It's not a feeling. It's a mental state. And when you have concern for the misfortune of others, this is the middle way. On the opposite side of that is worry and anxiety about other beings. But on the opposite side of that is the indifference and not caring less about what happens to any other beings. But the middle way is where you can have concern for them. And it doesn't mean you're necessarily going to take any action, but it's a mental state that your actions will come from. Your intention, speech, and actions will be motivated by that compassion, the concern for the misfortune of other beings. This is what compassion is. So now that you understand what compassion and living beings are based on the natural laws, now I'd like to give you this little shorthand way that can maybe help you if you maybe need help to understand the 5 aggregates and you're not quite sure and understand them 100%. One of the little shorthand ways to think about it is a living being is typically going to come from an egg, a sperm, and a consciousness. But this isn't actually true in all cases. It's the 5 aggregates that is the natural laws. And that's why the Buddha taught it that way. Not all living beings actually come from an egg and a sperm. They all have a consciousness, but they don't all come from an egg and a sperm. There's some living beings that you will see in the world that don't come from an egg and a sperm. But this can be like a shorthand way for you to kind of get probably a good 99% of all living beings is they're going to come from an egg, a sperm, and they're going to have a consciousness. But it's really the 5 aggregates that you need to really know and be able to apply to be able to figure out what is a living being. And why this is so important is because anytime you're causing harm to a living being, this harm is going to come back to you. And remember, harm is where you're damaging a being's material possessions, causing harm to their physical body, causing harm to their reputation. This is the type of harm that you can cause to another being. You can't cause them discontentedness. You can't cause another being to be angry or frustrated. It's their own cravings, desires, attachments that are causing that, but you can cause them harm. So now that we understand what a living being is, and what the Buddha is teaching us is to live compassionately, because that way we won't cause harm to them, then you need to start looking at things that could actually cause harm in terms of taking life, because that's what he's teaching you, is to abandon the taking of life. So euthanasia, human or animal, termination of a pregnancy, suicide, assisted suicide, capital punishment, war, government-sponsored killings, murder, these are all intentional killings. But whether you choose to do these things or not is a choice for you to make. Again, I'm not here to tell you whether you should or shouldn't do these things, because there's actually examples where in some cases these things could actually be beneficial and produce wholesome results for you, but in other situations it could potentially produce unwholesome results. It depends on how you apply this particular precept. And I'm going to use some of these as examples to help illustrate this, because when you first look at a precept like this, it can look like there's this large gray area and you're not quite sure how to apply it. But when you start dissecting it, you can start seeing this more clearly. So let's take something like termination of a pregnancy. Now, some people think of this as a political issue, and they have trouble sometimes talking about it because they think about it as a political issue. I don't think of it as a political issue. It's a human issue, because we have technology to terminate pregnancies, and this can actually be beneficial and helpful in one situation, but in another situation, it could potentially cause harm. Whether someone chooses to do this or not, it's a choice for that person to make. I would never tell somebody whether they should or shouldn't get an abortion or terminate a pregnancy. That's a choice for that person to make. If somebody came and asked me what they should do, I wouldn't actually tell them. I would say, if you terminate your pregnancy, here's what you'll experience. If you don't terminate your pregnancy, here's what you'll experience. And then the choice is up to them to make. And then if they come back and they tell me that they've terminated their pregnancy, okay, it doesn't affect me. This is a choice for each individual to make. I'm here to help everybody and anybody, and my love is unconditional for each individual person. I don't have any expectations of anybody. So let me give you some examples here with termination of a pregnancy, so you can see how it can potentially be applied in a way that would be helpful and beneficial and produce wholesome results, and in a situation that it would potentially cause unwholesome results. So if I was a woman, which obviously I'm not, right? If I had a womb and I had a fetus inside this womb, and medical technology told me that, hey, this fetus inside your womb, it is not going to ever live a viable life outside the womb. And if you continue to allow that to grow inside the womb, it's threatening your own life, and you could actually die from this. In this situation, I might choose to terminate the pregnancy, and that would be living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. Because whenever you're practicing things like loving kindness and compassion, you need to practice it for this being first. If you don't have loving kindness and compassion for this being, you can't have it for other beings either. So if you were to allow this being to continue to grow inside the womb, knowing that it's never going to live a viable life outside the womb, that wouldn't be living compassionately for all living beings, which is this living being that you are, right? So in this situation, someone might choose to terminate the pregnancy, and now it's going to produce wholesome results for them, that their life is going to be saved. And this is probably like a once in a lifetime situation, maybe twice, who knows, but it's very rare that this kind of situation is going to occur. But in another situation, say I was out there having sex with lots of different people, not even knowing, necessarily who is impregnating me, and now maybe 6, 8, 10 times I'm having a termination of a pregnancy. In this situation, the medical treatment of having a termination of pregnancy is going to start causing harm to this body. I'm going to start having lots of difficulties from having that operation or that procedure so many times, so frequently. And now I'm just using it in order to use it as birth control, rather than using some other method that could maybe be more helpful, where I'm not having to impact another living being. So in these two situations, whether somebody chooses to do it or not, it's up to them. But what I'm showing you is the cause and effect, or the action and result, that in one situation, it's not going to have a major impact to the body because it's like a once in a lifetime, maybe twice in a lifetime situation, where in this other situation where it's being used frequently, now it's going to start impacting the body, and the person's going to incur unwholesome results because of it. So remember, it's not punishments and rewards, it's helping you to be able to see this sequence of events and how we will experience the results of our decisions. Then here we have other things like war. Okay, if we were to be in a war, there are certain results that we're going to experience because of that. Let's say a government tells us, hey, we would like you to go over there and kill those people, right? In this situation, a human being, the government, is saying, hey, if you go over there and kill those people, that's completely fine with us. We won't prosecute you for murder when you come back to our country. But if you kill someone in our country, we're going to prosecute you for murder. This is the human law, and these are imperfect. They're not going to be created and administered perfect because human beings are involved in doing this. But you can't run and hide from that karma. If you went off into a war, even though your government is saying, yes, it's okay to go over there and kill those people, we're not going to prosecute you for murder, you're still going to experience the results of those decisions. You can experience where you have amputations, where you have brain injuries, you can get murdered yourself, you can get addicted to drugs and alcohol and other substances, you can have difficulties when you come back to society, reintegrating into society, you can have difficulties securing employment and housing. You can even commit suicide. This is very common for soldiers who go off into combat. They come back and commit suicide. This is the results of decisions that were made to go off and kill. You can't run and hide from the karma of having done that. So this is where you would need to decide in any situation, is this something that you would like to do or not do? Notice here that this precept, it doesn't say preserve all life at all cost. That's not what the Buddha is teaching you. Right? Because there's going to be some situations where you might need to kill a living being. I'll give you one. Okay. Say that you have a home and there's termites that are infesting your home and starting to eat your home. Right? Well, if this is going on, you know that the first thing you need to do is live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. And if you let these beings continue to eat your home, you're not living compassionately, because pretty soon you're going to be out of a home, right? And this actually happened with me and my wife. The termites were starting to eat our home, and we needed to figure out what to do and practice this precept, right? So one of the things that we did is we looked online to see if there was a way to eradicate the termites without killing them. And what we found out is that there wasn't a way to do that. So my wife called to a company and asked them to come take care of it. And they came and they put food around and they ate this food that had poison in it, and they took it back to their nest. And these beings, over the course of 2 years, left our home, right? And now that's living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, because we needed to live compassionately for myself, my wife, and my son. Because if we were out of a home and we just let these beings eat our home, we wouldn't be living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. And this is one of the challenges of being in the animal realm, is they don't have the same level of consciousness as a human being, that they don't understand that if they went out into the forest and ate that wood, they wouldn't be causing harm to any living beings. But because they were causing harm to living beings, harm came to them. This was their karma, right? So notice that this precept doesn't say preserve all life at all costs. That's not what the Buddha is teaching you. He's saying to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, and doing some research to figure out if there's a way to get rid of these without killing them. This is living compassionately. We had compassion for these beings, but there was no way for us to get rid of them without actually hiring this person to come do this. Maybe in the future there'll be a way to do that, but right now there isn't a way to do that. Sometimes students ask me questions like about a DNR. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. There's places where you can get a legal document, and while you're alive, you can sign a legal document that says, if this body dies, then don't bring it back to life using medical technology. If you've done one of these, or you're planning to do one of these, sometimes people ask me, is this living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings? And the answer is yes. What you're saying is, I'm comfortable with death. That if this being dies, you don't need to bring it back to life with medical technology. You haven't actually killed any being at all. You're just saying, I'm comfortable with death. So if this is something you choose to do, you're still practicing this precept, because you haven't actually killed anything. You haven't caused the harm to any being. You have abandoned the taking of life. You're not actually taking a life in that situation. Then sometimes people ask me about defense and protection. They say, hey, what if someone breaks into my house at 3 a.m. in the morning? What should I do? Well, the first thing I'll share with you is, if someone breaks into your house at 3 a.m. in the morning, they're not bringing you chocolate and flowers. Right? I can assure you that they're there to do some harm, right? And as they are choosing to do harm, there may be some harm that comes to this person. What I would suggest someone to do is, if possible, just get out of the house. That's the best thing. Protect this being, get out of the house, right? But you might not be able to do that. You might look outside and you might notice that there's a big gang of people outside in your yard. You might not be able to go outside, right? So you might be backed up against a corner, and now it wouldn't be living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings if you just sat there and let them hit you with sticks and stab you with knives and all these kinds of things, right? So if you needed to defend this being, then go ahead and do that. What I would encourage you to do is cause the least amount of harm as possible. And if you are able to do that and still defend this being, then you're living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. The Buddha is not giving you a decision tree. He's not saying, if this happens, do that. If this happens, do that. Because that would be a permanent answer for every single situation. You need to be able to move to this higher consciousness where you take in the variables of any given situation and figure out what would be best in any given situation. So that's why I couldn't say, in all situations, do it this way. This precept isn't that way. You're going to need to take in the variables. So if you can get out, get out. But if you can't get out, maybe there's a fire or a gang or something like this and you can't get out of the house, then maybe you're going to need to stand there and defend this being. And any harm that comes to this person who broke in at 3 a.m. in the morning, that's their karma. Because they're causing harm, harm is now coming to them. They damaged material possessions. They're now potentially inflicting harm on your physical body, and now this harm is going to come to this being. So you're still living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. Then sometimes people ask me about eating vegan or consuming plant-based products or animal products. This is something that you might choose to look at in order to practice this precept really closely. Whether you choose to move to a vegan food supply or not is totally up to you. But if you look at this closely, what you're going to come to find out is that at one time, human beings were plant-based eaters. When we first started, we ate all plant-based food. And this is what scientists and archaeologists tell us, but you don't have to believe them. Because remember, nothing in this practice is about belief. You're looking for independent verification of this for yourself. And the way that you can verify this is look at your teeth. Compare your teeth to like a cow or a horse. We have exactly the same type of teeth as they have. We weren't designed to eat meat. When we first came into the world, we were eating plants. And that's why our teeth are flat in the way that they are. We don't have those sharp, ripping, tearing teeth like a lion or a tiger or something like that. But we were so populous that we ran out of plants in the forest. So we saw animals that were killing and eating meat. So we started being scavengers. We started organizing groups of people to run away the lions and the tigers, and we would take over their kill and we would start eating their meat that they had killed. That wasn't enough meat for us. So then we started doing organized hunting, and we started organizing and going out in packs and killing animals and bringing them back and eating them. But then that wasn't enough for us. So then we started doing manufactured farming. And that's where we are today, is that we manufacture animals in order to kill them and then eat them and then ingest them. But when you're ingesting an animal, when you're eating that flesh, you're not just eating the flesh, you're eating whatever is in that flesh. And they've done research and they've tested animal flesh, and they found different substances other than that should really be there. So they've taken fish out of like wild streams and clean running streams, and they found substances like cocaine and antidepressants and things like this. So when you're eating the flesh of the animal, you're not just eating the flesh, you're also ingesting drugs and hormones and toxins and things like this. So what you'll find if you choose to ever move to a plant-based food supply is that your mind's going to become more clear because you're not ingesting those drugs and hormones and toxins, and you'll notice that you have less sickness in the body. You'll notice that the body's lighter when you move to a plant-based food supply. But whether you do this or if you do it is totally up to you. It's your choice. I'm just helping you to be able to see the natural law of karma here, that there is a cause and effect, or action and result. And by eating animal flesh, it's going to affect the condition of the body. Even if you eat farmed animals, because farmers are putting hormones and drugs and toxins into the animal in order to grow it really fast so that they can hurry up and make a profit. So when you're ingesting that, it's going to affect the health of the body. And I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but there's actually some female girls that are having their menstrual cycle as early as 5 years old now. This is because of the speeding up of the body through ingesting these drugs and hormones. My son had more hair on his legs at the age of 8 than I probably had when I was, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, because at one time he used to eat meat and he had a lot of hair on his legs. And this was the speeding up of the growth of the body through ingesting these hormones from the meat. So whether you choose to move to this plant-based food supply or not, it's a choice for you to make, but I'm here to share with you the cause and effect related to it. And you would need to do research on your own and see the truth for yourself. So do you guys have any questions on this particular precept? Yes, sir.
I have a question about the first one. How do you prove the consciousness of being?
How do you prove the consciousness?
Yeah.
So the consciousness is going to have feelings. It's going to be able to have perceptions, like views and opinions. It's going to make choices and decisions. These are all things that are inside the consciousness. So an individual that has a consciousness, they're going to have free will and they're going to be making their own decisions.
But isn't the only thing that lives that I can prove that has consciousness is myself?
You can see in another being. So you can see a squirrel has freedom of choice and it's making its own decisions, has its own free will. So there needs to be a consciousness there in order for that to occur. So the consciousness is like the CPU of the computer. It's the central processing unit. The consciousness is the same thing. The mind is the same thing for a squirrel or a rabbit. It's what's allowing it to make its own choices and decisions. Without that, they wouldn't be able to make choices and decisions.
But what if this animal just make those choices just by sheer randomness, and I just observe how this animal does it by randomness, and the only thing that I can prove it for myself that I make my own decisions?
What do you mean by randomness?
Like that it just instinctively, without any free will, just chooses those things that it wants to do?
Choosing the own things that it wants to do is free will.
Yes, but like as in it doesn't as in, for example, that I like the idea of solipsism, I guess, that is that the only thing that I know is conscious is myself, and anything else is not conscious necessarily.
I can see that a rabbit has a consciousness, a squirrel has a mind, a horse has a mind. I can see that. You should be able to see it too, but if you can't, if you look closer at it, you should be able to see that it has all 5 aggregates: form, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, and a consciousness.
Okay. How is it then, for example, let's say plants, right? You could maybe argue that even though it's not measurable in a sense, or not measurable by today's technology, that those maybe have also a subset of maybe lower consciousness. Is that a possibility to take in mind?
I can see that a plant doesn't have a consciousness because it doesn't make choices and decisions like picking itself up, walking down the street, and replanting itself. It can't do that. The only reason why that plant is in that location is because a seed was brought there by some other being or the wind or something like that. And then once that seed lands, it's there. That it can't choose and make any choices and decisions to move anywhere else. So it doesn't have free will.
Okay, but like, for example, if you have the sunflower, for example, it rotates every day towards the sun to collect the most high, photosynthesis. Yeah,
that's a response based on the biology, right? It's not from the consciousness. It's not a choice from an actual consciousness. It's from the biology of the plant and the way that cells and atoms and molecules work.
Okay, I guess I'm having trouble in just like defining consciousness, like just because I see another being, another human or whatever, I very like, okay, this person thinks maybe like me or different. Yeah. I would assume it has consciousness, but it's just like, because I cannot prove it, I also cannot 100%ly prove that it has consciousness by, I know, measurements, I guess. I can assume, right? Like you said with those 5 steps, but
a being with consciousness is going to have thoughts and ideas. It's going to have feelings. It's going to have the perceptions and choices and decisions. You can see this. So like I can see this being or that being. I can see feelings. I can see that it has perceptions. I can see that they make volitional formation. So I know that that being has a consciousness because all those things exist in the mind. So I don't need to be that being in order to see that that being has a mind.
But then for bacteria, like I also see a bacteria makes a conscious decision to, I know, for suicide, for example, there are examples, or for invading something, or for changing its behavior because of a virus, or doing something because of a reaction. Wouldn't that mean that those also have some lower form of consciousness?
No, because a bacteria isn't choosing, like, I would like to go from this being to that being. The only reason why that bacteria is moving from one being to another is because we choose to come in contact with each other, and then there's an exchange of some contact that now this bacteria moves to another being. That bacteria can't just get up and move itself somewhere else and then choose to infect this particular being. It's not making those choices. It's just relying on the wind or physical contact or something like this. It's not making the conscious choice to infect.
But wouldn't that be also true for, I don't know, some small fish that just follow along other fish and just don't really make that clear conscious decision to, you know, they just are there and they just follow the things, their natural instincts that exist, and follow that?
You just said it, though. You said that some small fish that choose to follow another fish.
I guess, yeah.
This is how the mind functions when it doesn't see true reality. It can speak and say things when it doesn't even really realize what it's saying, that you're actually saying that it has free will and it's making choices and decisions. Mm-hmm.
But that wouldn't apply to bacteria then. If the bacteria wouldn't choose for suicide, or wouldn't choose for not going into that, or not eating that other bacteria.
Yeah, you can see that it's not choosing to do that. It's just a biological thing that the wind is carrying it from one being to another, or contact from one being to another is incurring the transference of this bacteria. It's not choosing to get up and fly to another being and then infect this being. It's not making that choice. That's why it only spreads through contact.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yes, ma'am.
I have a question around compassionate killing, which compassion is the concern for the misfortune of others, and this is essentially euthanasia of an animal in this case. And it's like the situation of if a dog was hit by a car and it's in serious pain, you could wait and wait and wait and wait for it to be in pain for a long time, and maybe try to get it to care, and maybe it'll live, but it would be in pain for a long time and maybe not survive, and maybe not have what we would consider a decent life after that. Mm-hmm. Or maybe as the owner, that you wouldn't be able to give it a decent life after that. Even if it did survive, it would be in a different form than you were originally expecting. So in that situation, especially if it is a long time to be in pain for this animal, I could see that as a compassionate opportunity to euthanize or kill this animal.
Yeah. So in my opinion, there's no such thing as a compassionate killing, because what's happening is this being is making a decision for another being that you need to die. And you can't do that compassionately. Instead, what we need to be able to understand is the bigger problem that this being is facing. It's not this pain having been hit by a car that is the problem. That pain isn't the problem. The problem is that this, let's just use a dog, is in the cycle of rebirth. It's continuing to experience life after life after life after life. And when it's born, it's going to experience sickness, aging, death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. And as long as it's stuck in the cycle of rebirth, it's going to keep experiencing that over and over and over again. The way that this being gets out of that cycle is it needs to be reborn into a better and better existence with an opportunity to be able to then get to enlightenment and escape this whole cycle. So if this being was hit by a car, that's that being's karma. It made a certain decision and it got hit, and now it's experiencing this pain. So if we kill it prematurely, that's a decision that we're making for this being, when the better decision would be to let it live out its life and experience whatever karma it needs to experience in that particular life. Then it's going to have a better opportunity to get to an improved life. Usually what someone's doing in these situations is they're making those decisions. You brought up some of them, like a financial decision. It could be like, hey, I can't afford to take care of this animal. Or maybe someone themselves, they're attached to this animal and they're experiencing painful feelings by seeing this animal be in pain. And now someone might think like, oh, the way to get rid of my painful feelings is to kill this being so that I don't have to experience these painful feelings any longer. But if we let this being live out the rest of its life, it can experience all of its karma and then has a better opportunity to be able to get to an improved life. There was a situation like this where a student contacted me and they were saying that their vet was encouraging them to euthanize their animal. And of course I said, what you do is up to you. If you do euthanize it, here's what you'll potentially experience. If you don't, here's what you'll potentially experience. Ultimately, on their own, they decided not to euthanize the animal. The doctor had told this person that their animal had like 1 to 2 weeks to live. This person didn't euthanize their animal. It actually made a full recovery, and it lived for like another 1.5 or 2 years. And that's the reason why it's unwise for us to put into our own hands the choice of killing this other being, because we're not always going to make 100% wise decisions. It's better to just let this being live out its karma, and then it can get to a better and improved life where it can then have the opportunity to get to enlightenment and escape the real problem that it's having, which is being stuck in this cycle of rebirth.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. Another question I have.
Since you said that, let me just share this, okay? Because as you said, I hear what you're saying. The things that I teach, you're not going to see them right away. That's the whole reason why the mind experiences what it experiences. It'll experience anger and sadness and frustration, irritation. That's where you're at right now. You're not going to see 100% of what I'm saying the first time you hear me say it. This is why you need to be able to look at it. You need to be able to investigate it. You need to be able to understand there's certain things that your mind's holding on to now as false beliefs that you're going to need to be willing to look at those and examine them and let them go. Because what I'm sharing with you is not my beliefs or opinions, even though I sometimes preface it as this is my opinion, because that's a nice way of being humble and helping people to understand that I'm not pushing anything off on you to be able to try to convince you of anything. But if you understood everything that I understand right now, you wouldn't be experiencing frustration and annoyance and agitation and all these other discontent feelings. So when you hear someone teaching like this, you're not going to understand 100% of what they're sharing. You're not going to see it in the same way that that person sees it. So what I would encourage a student to do is listen and learn and understand like you did, and then think about it and reflect on it to understand that at some point in the future, you might come to a different conclusion than what you have right now sitting here. And that's the best thing you can do for yourself.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I hear it and I'm seeing it. I'm taking the opportunity to listen, even though I don't get it right now, but I'm just appreciating being exposed to it for the first time.
Good.
Another question is, this kind of goes back to yesterday when we talked about not using living beings to make a profit. And that kind of applied to a lot of different things, but I also had the question then about animals being used as tools, and if that counts as using them as a profit. I think we distinguish in society, we distinguish between domestic animals and then non-domesticated animals, where maybe it's accepted to use like work animals like horses or like water buffalo as a tool, which then we use as like transportation or to like cultivate the land. But it is benefiting from their work, their life. It's using them in some way to make income. And on the other side, then with domestic animals, maybe we're using them, the pets, and we're trying to get like some sort of desired companionship out of them, which isn't necessarily using them for income, but we're using them for something, for our own good. what do you like? There's a question in there.
Yeah, so I'll share a bunch of things with you here that you'll be able to think about, right? Is a few things. The Buddha teaches us that every being that we come in contact with has previously been our mother, our father, our brother, our sister, our son, our daughter, or some other relative, because we've all been in the cycle of rebirth for so long that it would be impossible to encounter another being that hasn't previously been one of our family members. So like when we were snakes, we were brother and sister, or maybe you were my grandmother and I was your granddaughter or something like this, right? So we've all been relatives, like the elephants that they went to see today. Those were your previous family members. And this is helping you to cultivate loving kindness and compassion in your own mind towards all beings. So this is one thing. The next thing is when we think about animals and the way that we treat animals, if we think about if there was another being on this planet that was more dominant than us, and that being was treating us the way that we treat animals, how would we feel about that? If we were being enslaved to work for these beings, and how long would it take for us to revolt and go against these beings? Like there was some giant, right? We wouldn't stand for that. But we've come to accept that we can have these animals as maybe meeting our own selfish desires for companionship. And we can also have these animals in order to do work for us that we would prefer not to do ourselves, that we don't want to do ourselves, or that we don't purchase machines for to do, or some other reason, right? But we're at a point in time in history that we actually don't need animals to do any of these kinds of things. We can actually use machinery and other things like this. But because of our past, there's some places that uses animals. And I know from our conversation that I think you grew up on a farm, or maybe you still live on a farm. I worked on a farm for a long time too, and I did a lot of killing of animals, and I worked with horses and rounded up cows and all these kinds of things, because that's what you do on a farm if you have animals. And I needed to be able to see the unwholesome karma that I was producing and that I was experiencing, because at that farm, doing all the killing that we did and doing all the work that we did with animals, we experienced a lot of harm as a result of that. And that's what you need to be able to focus on, is that sometimes when we're involved in that stuff, it's hard for us to be able to see what I'm saying now, because I wouldn't always have said what I'm saying now because I was involved in that kind of stuff. But now stepping away from it and looking at it from afar and putting this being in the same shoes of that horse or that cow or that goat or that sheep or that pig, now I can look at it and say, if that was me, or better yet, if that was my mom, because it's previously been my mom, would I do this same thing to it? Would I eat this being if it was my mom? Would I eat this being if it was my son? Would I enslave it to be my companion? Would I force it to do this work? And now the answer that I would say is no, right? I wouldn't do those things, and that would be living compassionately for all living beings. But we all need to evolve at our own pace and be able to see these kinds of things, because when we're involved in something like farming, we don't always see it because we're so involved in it. But when you step back from it and you put yourself in those shoes, or you think of these beings as being your family members, that's what will help you to be able to see that, yeah, we are being kind of selfish by just having this cat in my home, and it purrs and I feed it and I sleep with it and it feels warm and it gives me love and kisses and all these things. Yeah, the better thing would be for these animals to be out in the world living a wonderful life. And I wouldn't suggest that you take all your domesticated animals and you turn them out on the street. That's not what I'm suggesting. But if we look at this, we can say, like, yeah, we've kind of worked ourselves into a real issue here. And you can see the karma in this because of something we all just experienced, which is COVID. This came from what people think is, this animal market where they were selling animals and killing animals. And it's not just COVID. It's swine flu, bird flu, mad cow disease, HIV. All these things came from the animal world. This is our karma from having so much interaction with the animal world. And while some people feel great that we found vaccines and we've invented this vaccines, we haven't actually solved the problem with any of these things. There's a whole litany of viruses waiting for us in the animal realm. And as long as we have this close contact with animals, we're going to continue to experience virus after virus after virus virus after virus, because we haven't solved the actual problem, which is our unwise decision to have such close contact with animals. Animals should be in the animal world doing their animal thing. Humans can be in the animal or the human world doing our human thing. And then because we're making wise choices in that regard, we won't actually have viruses coming from the animal world into the human world. But whether people choose to do this or not, it's their own decision. We all have our own individual unique decisions, but this is where you can see the gamma of the cause and effect, or the action and result. And then whatever choices you make, you'll experience the consequences of that.
It feels very privileged. And to say that modern farmers have had better karma because they don't have to rely on animals, whereas farmers in more rural areas of the world that have to rely on animals to till the land, they have worse karma. And so then now they are inflicting that even more, but they don't have the choice necessarily to not use like water buffalo to till the land. So it feels kind of gray area there.
I didn't describe it that way as you're describing. What I'm saying is this is the gamma, that if we use animals, this is what we're going to experience. They do have a choice. We all have a choice. This is where if we think we don't have a choice, then we feel stuck. But we do have a choice. We can choose to not farm. That's a choice that we can make. But with our lack of wisdom, we'll continue to do things that have been done in the past, and then we'll perpetuate these same problems over and over and over again. But then we each experience the results of our decisions. As I started off this talk, is I'm not here to convince anybody of anything. What people choose to do is what they choose to do. But there's certain gamma in choosing to use machinery versus using animals. This is a different gamma, and it's not about whether you're privileged or unprivileged. It's just the natural law. It's just the way that it is. And you can see it for yourself if you look at it closely. Mm-hmm. Any other questions on this one? Okay, let me see if we have anything online. Okay, I don't see anything online. So let's go to the next one, which is number 2. Here's the words of the Buddha: abandoning the taking of what is not given, living purely, accepting what is given, awaiting what is given, without stealing. So here, obviously, the Buddha is teaching not to steal, because when somebody's earned a certain amount of resources and they're using those resources in order to support their life, if we were to steal from them, it's going to cause this individual harm. If I was to steal someone's car, now they can't go to work. If they have children, they can't take their kids to school. They can't go to the store and buy basic necessities that they need in order to provide for their life. So I've caused this individual harm, and now this harm is going to come back to me. So that's why the Buddha teaches us not to steal. It's also a certain amount of craving. And the same thing with the previous one too. As I mentioned to you guys, the Buddha is teaching you how to eliminate craving, anger, and ignorance. He's not teaching you rules or commandments. So abandoning the killing of other living beings and doing things that we were just talking about, like enslaving animals, this is to eliminate your craving, your longing and yearning for your own selfish desires. This is to eliminate your ill will towards another being. This is to eliminate the ignorance or the a knowing of true reality. And the same thing here, that you're eliminating your craving. Because if I was to steal from somebody, I have a certain craving of I want that thing, but I'm not willing to work for it for myself. So I go out and steal it from somebody. And now there's a certain amount of ill will in the mind that I'm causing harm to this other being. And it's coming from the ignorance or the unknowing of true reality. And this is what's producing the unwholesome results in our day-to-day life, is making decisions through craving, anger, and ignorance, like we talked about yesterday evening. So not stealing will help you to eliminate your craving, your anger or ill will, and your ignorance. Also, the Buddha talks about here in this precept, you can understand that he's teaching you to not assume something can be used. If I was, say, a college student and I was turning in a paper to my professor and the professor was out of the room and their stapler is sitting on their desk, and I'm like, I need to staple my paper. And I reach for the stapler and I start stapling my paper. And now the professor walks in. The professor is like, hey, what are you doing? That's my stapler. Right? And now this person being attached to their stapler, they're having painful feelings, and now they're going to attribute those painful feelings to me, and now they might fail me on that particular assignment. or they might fail me an entire class. This is the result of my decisions of having assumed that this stapler can be used. So a wiser choice would be like, hey, professor, do you mind if I use your stapler? And they're like, sure, go ahead, no worries. Or they might say, no, you can't use it. Okay, no worries, thank you anyway. And now you go find one somewhere else, right? And now you protect your mind. So one of the things that the Buddha is doing for you is he's teaching you how to navigate the world with a bunch of unenlightened beings, right? Because if you went around the world with this lack of wisdom and you just started haphazardly using things from other people, you wouldn't be able to experience wholesome results. Even when I first came to this temple and I started teaching here, I was using donations from the students to help pay for electric and water, and I still do that here. And I'm giving the temple a significant amount of money each month to be able to afford for us to be able to be here and teach. But they had water outside, right? And we needed drinking water. I didn't just go over there and assume that I could use their drinking water. I asked them, I said, hey, do you mind if we use your drinking water? I'd like to serve some drinking water for our students. And at that time, when I first got here, I hadn't established where we could have our own deliveries. And they're like, sure, you can have our water. And I was like, oh, thank you so much. Where now we have our own deliveries for water. But back then, when we first moved in, I didn't have the time to do that. So even in an environment like this, where I was already giving them a substantial amount of money, and I know that that was more than enough that makes up for this water, I didn't even assume that I could use their water. I needed to ask, right? And this keeps your Dhamma clean, keeps your Dhamma wholesome. Here the Buddha says, accepting what is given. You can see this in the precept. What he's talking about here is that when you're in an environment where people are practicing generosity, it's wise to accept what is given. The reason why is because it's enhancing the quality of that person's mind. Whereas if grandma's going to give you that sweater at Christmas and you look at it and you're like, I'm never going to wear that sweater, rather than shutting it down, you would like to accept it because it's helping grandma's mind, right? It's enhancing the quality of her mind that she's practicing generosity. But if grandma gets angry because you've now given it to someone else, because that might be what you choose to do, that's grandma causing that anger. That's not you. She hasn't practiced pure generosity. She had a certain expectation of something that she wanted. And now when you're giving it to other people, she gets angry or frustrated. You haven't caused that anger or frustration. Because the other option is to put it in your closet, let it sit there for 20 years and deteriorate. And now all those resources have gone to waste. So you could actually give it to somebody else. So not only did grandma practice generosity, but you're practicing generosity too, enhancing the quality of your mind. And now it might go through 10, 15, 20 different hands. And eventually somebody looks at that sweater and they say, that's the most beautiful sweater I have ever seen. I'm going to wear that every day of my life, right? So it's going to find somebody that really enjoys that sweater. So that's the benefit of passing it on, right? So you can do that. And if you shut down grandma's generosity over and over and over again, eventually she's going to stop practicing generosity with you. So you would just like to accept it. But remember, you got to move to this higher consciousness. It's not black and white. It's not always do it this way or always do it that way. Because if somebody offers you heroin, are you going to accept what is given? No, you're not going to accept what is given, right? So you got to use your consciousness. The Buddha's not teaching you black and white here. He's giving you the natural laws, and then you've got to move to this higher consciousness, take in the variables, and figure out what would be wise to do in any given situation. Same thing with do not steal, right? If I was outside in my neighborhood, in my village, and I saw someone had a laceration on their arm from maybe like a yard tool, and they're bleeding profusely, right? And they're about to die. If I saw my other neighbor had a piece of fabric on their front porch, and I could put a tourniquet on their arm, I'm going to grab that piece of fabric and put a tourniquet on their arm. And then once they're in the ambulance and they're headed off to the hospital, I'm going to go to that neighbor, excuse me, so sorry, I need to talk with you, right? I got this fabric from your front porch and I needed to use it as a tourniquet for this individual. I would like to make amends here. Can I buy one of those fabrics for you? Can I give you some money? What can I do to fix this, right? So it's not like always do it this way or always do it that way. You need to use your higher consciousness and make a wise decision based on the variables that you're faced with, right? So each of these are that particular way. It's not black and white. Here, awaiting what is given. What this is all about is like, say you have a life partner and you guys are living together, and say they're going off on a business trip. You would like to await what is given. The opposite of that would be like, hey, you're going to that place. They have really good this and that and this and that. Get me this and get me that and get me this and get me that. You're kind of loading them up and burdening them with all these things that you want from them, right? And now they're going around town feverishly trying to find the things that you want them to find. And then when they come back, they don't have everything you found, and now you get angry. Or, they didn't find everything you wanted, so now you get angry or frustrated. So the Buddha teaches you, just await what is given. If somebody would like to get you something when they go away on a trip, wonderful. And if they're not interested in doing that, or they don't have the time to do it, then that's fine too. But if you have expectations that somebody will give you something, when you don't get it, you'll get frustrated, you'll get agitated. So he's teaching you how to protect your own mind, to not have expectations of other people to get you something. But again, there's a gray area here, right? I've had students that have come to me and they said, hey, I'm going back to the USA. I'm going to be there for 6 weeks, and then I'm going to come back to Thailand. Is there anything that you would like me to bring you? Right? They're offering it. Now they're practicing generosity. They're offering to bring me something. Well, in this situation, I might say, oh, can you bring me this? Or can you bring me that? Right? So now they're offering it to me. That's different here. So you need to be able to see the difference there. And now this can be more clear for you. So it's not such a big gray area. It becomes a lot clearer for you. So do you guys have any questions on this one? Looks like Janae has a question online. Go ahead, Janae.
So something that I've encountered in my life as an artist was like the idea of copyright and, oh, like you stole my idea, or that was my idea first, or something like that. So I know you're not like a copyright lawyer or anything like that, but just in general, like what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's the same thing. Like with the internet and stuff, people put a lot of resources out there, and you're not interested in taking that, right? Like if someone has a certain music or certain artwork, if you just take it, that's stealing. So you would like to be sure that you're practicing this precept as it relates to that too, because these are natural laws, and that's why they apply during the lifetime of the Buddha and now as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Cecile, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. So can an enlightened being be, I don't know how to say it in English, like stolen? Can somebody, I mean, if somebody robs something from an enlightened being, this enlightened being would talk about it like, oh, somebody robbed me, or their detachment like erase this experience?
Yeah. There's 5 things that are called the unattainable. These are the 5 things, no matter how enlightened you are, you can't attain these things. You're still going to experience these things. Sickness, aging, and death, loss, and destruction. You're still going to experience these 5 things. So sickness, aging, death, loss, and destruction. No matter how enlightened you are, you're still going to experience those things, because that's impermanence. That this body can't be permanently healthy even when you're enlightened. This body can't be permanently youthful even when you're enlightened. There can't be permanent life even when you're enlightened. Your material objects, you can't permanently keep them. You're going to lose them from time to time, and you're going to experience destruction, like a tree falling on your house, for example. So an enlightened being could experience somebody stealing from them. So this is a possibility, but it's not going to be happening every day or regularly. It's very rare that this kind of thing would happen, but it can happen.
Okay. And would it be like the same karma for somebody that robs something from an unenlightened being than to rob to an enlightened being? Because I would think an enlightened being is detached from it, so he wouldn't be angry, I guess, or sad or something like that. I mean, an enlightened being, I think they think or they realize they actually don't possess anything. So that detachment would have something to do with the karma of the people that it is robbing, or not really?
No, because the individual is still making decisions through craving, anger, and ignorance. Those are the 3 things that motivates somebody to steal, for example, is they have a craving, there's a certain amount of ill will, and that's coming from the ignorance. So it doesn't matter who they're doing it to, they're still going to experience the results of those decisions because they're putting out craving, anger, and ignorance. They're making decisions through that, and they're still going to experience the results. You're 100% accurate that an enlightened being, if somebody stole something from them, they wouldn't be upset, they wouldn't be angry or frustrated, but they still might make wise decisions in order to remedy the situation, right? They might still go to the police, report this, and this person that stole is still going to experience the results of the decisions that they made to steal from an enlightened being. Even if it's not reported to the police, they're still going to experience results of those decisions.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now the next one, which is number 3. This is where we were talking about sexual misconduct yesterday, or this morning actually. This is the Buddha describing that in more detail. Here he says, abandoning unchastity, abandoning sexual relations with women, men who are protected by their mother, father, mother and father, brother, sister, or relatives, who are protected by teachings, who have a husband, wife, or partner whose violation entails a penalty, or even with one who has been garlanded by a man, woman, or partner as a sign of engagement. Okay, so we're going to break this down so you can see it really clearly. So this one where he's talking about abandoning having sex with someone who's protected by their family, what he's talking about there is having sex with minors. Like if we had sex with an 8-year-old or 12-year-old, this is going to be very impactful for that being. As you can remember, if you've had sex before, you know how impactful the first time is that you have sex. And if we did that with a very young child, this individual is learning from their parents, they're learning and growing. This is going to kind of take them away from that learning experience. So the Buddha is teaching us that it would be unwise to do this. And this is where the human laws and the natural law of karma in most places is matching. But there's actually some places where it's legal to actually have sex with a minor. But if you look at those places, you'll see that their government is very unstable, their economy is very unstable, their society at large is very unstable. And this is the karma as a result, because if beings are having sex very early in life like this, their mind isn't being developed to get to the point where they can create a very well-developed country where there's a good solid government and economy and social systems and things like this. So you can see the karma related to that. Where the Buddha is saying whose violation entails a penalty, he's talking about sex without consent. If we were to rape somebody, this is causing harm to that individual, and he's showing us that it would be unwise to do that because individuals are going, if I tried to rape somebody, you could get injured, you could get murdered, you could get beat up, you could get arrested, you could get sexually transmitted diseases. All of these things are possibilities from the unwise decision to choose to have sex without consent. Here where the Buddha is saying abandoning unchastity, it's important to understand what chastity is. During ancient times, there were fathers who would put metal underwear on their daughters, and they would have a lock and key, and the father had the lock and key. So basically, this person isn't having sex with anybody. That's chastity, right? So unchastity would be just the opposite of that, is having sex with lots and lots and lots and lots of people. So what the Buddha is teaching you is the abandon unchastity, where you're having sex with lots and lots and lots and lots of people, right? And the reason why is because it produces harmful results for you. That's where STDs come from, and you have difficulties in those kinds of situations. There's some cultures where if you meet a partner, you might go home to your family, maybe you're 25, 30 years old, you go home to your family and you say, hey, I met this person, we're going to get married, we've been having a relationship, we'd like to live with you for a period of time, we're going to save up money and then we're going to go buy our own home. And in this case, your parents might say, oh yeah, sure, go ahead and move right in. You know, we understand and we'd like to support you in this journey with this new person. And in this situation, your family has accepted the relationship. This isn't what the Buddha is talking about up here with abandoning relations with people who are protected by their family. This family has accepted the relationship that come into their home. So if that's the case, if you live in that kind of culture, or you choose to do that kind of thing, that's what is happening here. Okay. Up here where it says who are protected by teachings, what this is individuals who have decided to remain celibate in their in order to get to enlightenment. And if an individual has chosen to do that, that would be the best thing for that individual to get to enlightenment, right? Whether you choose to give up sex or not is a choice for you to make. Whether you do that, or if you do that, or when you choose to do that, it's a choice for you to make. As I was sharing previously in this retreat, you can get to the second stage of enlightenment. You can hang out there for however long you like, and your life is going to be quite peaceful in the second stage of enlightenment, and you still might be choosing to have a sexual relationship in that particular stage of enlightenment. You're still going to be experiencing discontentedness, but you might do all the other work on the path to enlightenment and just still be hanging out there for a while. But at some point, you and your partner are probably going to be like, yeah, we've been there, done that enough times, right? And now you might decide to let go of sexual activity, and you move on from there into the third and fourth stage of enlightenment. So if somebody's decided that they're going to give up sexual activity in order to make their way to enlightenment, if we were to try to lure that person away from that celibacy, it's causing harm to that person, because now they're not going to be able to get to enlightenment. But it's also causing harm to the community at large, because that individual getting to enlightenment would be able to help other people to be able to also get to enlightenment. So whether somebody chooses to have sex or not, it's their choice. But if you're choosing to have sex, you would like to look for somebody who's also interested in having sex and hasn't taken this vow of celibacy. Here in Thailand, they make it really easy for you that individuals who wear orange robes and shave their hair, they're not typically having sex. People that wear white clothes and shave their hair, they're typically not having sex either. I don't have sex any longer. I'm not wearing white clothes because I'm trying to advertise that, right? Because if someone was interested for any reason, I wouldn't be interested. But that's not why I wear white clothes. But here in Thailand, if you see people wearing white clothes, or you see people wearing orange robes, you can know that those people aren't choosing to have sex. And now you can just have sex with other people who aren't wearing those kinds of things. So they make it easy for you in Thailand for that reason. Sometimes people ask me, like, why do you need to give up sex in order to get to enlightenment? The reason why is, if you ever have remembered a time where you used to maybe have sex for a period of time, but then you stopped having sex, you can see that your mind was agitated and frustrated and annoyed during that period of time. You're not going to be able to actually get to the peace and the joy that is a permanent mental state as long as there's a craving for sex inside the mind. If there was a way to get to enlightenment while still having sex, I would have figured that out, and I would be glad to report it to you. Unfortunately, I was not able to figure that out, and it's not possible to do that, because you're still going to experience agitation and frustration at some point. So in order to get to the permanent peace and the permanent joy, you're going to ultimately need to get rid of sexual activity. But if you're young, maybe you're interested in having a family, you have a partner, maybe now's not the right time. You do all the other work on the path to enlightenment, work your way up to that second stage of enlightenment, hang out there for a while. Your life's going to be quite peaceful and quite enjoyable. But every once in a while, you're going to want sex and you can't get it. And now you're going to be agitated, you're going to be frustrated, you're annoyed, and you'll be able to see that, it's because of this sexual craving that's in the mind. And now, at some point in the future, when you've extinguished that craving, you're starting to see more peacefulness, more joy. You're going to start appreciating that peacefulness in your mind more than the sexual activity. Because with the sexual activity, you'll feel pleasure for a few hours or for a few days perhaps, but then it's going to eventually wear off because it's a conditioned feeling. And now you're going to be right back in the same situation. But more and more, you're going to see 1 month, 2 months, 3 months where your mind is peaceful and joyful and it's calm and you have all this clarity of your mind. And then you're going to end up choosing to have sex, and all that's going to go away. And now for a couple of weeks, your mind's going to be frustrated and agitated. You're going to be lacking clarity of mind. And then you're going to be like, wow, I enjoyed that 2 or 3 months of peacefulness so much more. Having this sex and getting this temporary pleasure really crashed that for me. I would like to get back to this over here. And that's where you're going to ultimately decide, like, yeah, there's something better in the world than sex. It's probably hard to imagine that there's something better in the world than sex, but there is. It's called enlightenment. Okay, so this is why the Buddha is teaching you that it would be unwise to have sex with someone who's protected by their teachings, because the very best thing for that person and the community at large is for that person to get to enlightenment. Then here, people who are committed in other relationships or if you are committed in a relationship, that's the same thing as unchastity. And then also up here, who have a husband, wife, or partner, or even one who's been garlanded by a man, woman, or partner as a sign of engagement. This is where people go out of the relationship, or you might lure somebody else out of their relationship. This is where you can get beat up. People have gotten murdered for these kinds of things. Material possessions have gotten destroyed. This is cause and effect. This is the natural law of karma. And that's what the Buddha is teaching you here. He's not teaching you rules or commandments. He's showing you the cause and effect between decisions that you make and results that you experience. And that way you can make decisions that are wise for you. People who are human trafficked, these are people who are being forced to have sex against their will. Typically, there's money involved. In this kind of situation, if you go into that environment, you can also get injured, you can get beat up, you can get murdered, you can get sexually transmitted diseases, you can get robbed, and things like this. So it's really unwise to go down that path. Some other things here is paid sexual services. Even if someone's choosing to do it on their own, same thing. You can get STDs, you can get beat up, you can get murdered, you can get robbed. These are all things that happen, even if it's that person's choice to do it, even if they're not being human trafficked. Notice here, as I said yesterday, that the Buddha doesn't talk about same gender partners because there's no harm. It's two loyal, loving, consenting adults choosing to have sex, and they're not actually causing any harm to each other. And you can understand through the universal truth of impermanence that there's never been a time in history where all people had sex with the opposite gender. It's just never happened. That as long as human history has existed, there's been people that have had sex with opposite gender, and there's been people who have had sex with the same gender. So in some people's minds, they have a craving for everybody to have sex with the opposite gender. And when they don't get their craving fulfilled, they get angry, right? And where that's coming from is their ignorance or their unknowing of true reality. So you can have the truth to understanding the universal truth of impermanence, that it's not possible for everybody to have sex with the opposite gender, because that would be permanence if that was the case. And I always like to point out how wise the Buddha was, because 2,500 years ago, he understood this. And today we have people that don't understand this. So that's how you can see how wise this individual is. Also, you can see transgender individuals are completely normal and explainable through the natural laws. That if you understand that the body is one thing and the mind is something else, and that we've all been different beings at different times, that this mind coming into this body may not identify with the same as the sexual organs of the body. This is where people don't always understand that transgender individuals are completely normal. There's never been a time in history where everybody's mind identified with the same gender as the physical organs, because the physical organs are just the physical organs of the body. That's the sexual organs. But the mind is where the gender is typically allocated within one's own mind. And if we've been maybe a squirrel that was a female, and a rabbit that was a female, and a cow that was a female, and then now that mind ends up in a male body of a human being, then this individual could very easily identify as a female, even though the body has male sexual organs. If every mind that landed into a body identified as the same gender as the sexual organs, once again, this would be permanence. But we understand the universal truth of impermanence, that some minds are going to identify with the same gender as the physical organs, and other minds aren't. That's impermanence. So through the universal truth of impermanence and through the cycle of rebirth, we can see that transgender individuals are completely normal. So if you're a transgender individual, or you know someone who is, or if you prefer same gender relationships, completely normal. You're not causing harm to anybody whatsoever. But other people, they might have craving, then their anger arises and is coming from their ignorance. And that's why the world experiences what it experiences. Sometimes people ask me about masturbation. So I'll explain to you about this, that there are some situations where it could actually be helpful and beneficial, and there's other situations where it could potentially be harmful. It really depends how you're actually using it. Some people have been taught, like, never masturbate, you should never masturbate. Well, I'm going to show you some examples where it could be helpful, and I'll show you some examples where it can be harmful, right? So let's just say somebody was interested in raping another individual, and instead they decide to do some masturbation instead. It was actually really helpful. because they didn't cause harm to this other individual. They actually used some masturbation, they satisfied their craving, and now they didn't cause harm to this other individual. This was very helpful in that situation. Or say somebody is listening to this talk, either online or here, and maybe they have 5 boyfriends or girlfriends, or 10 boyfriends or girlfriends, right? And they're having sex with all these different people. But now they hear this and they're like, you know what? I should bring that down to 1. That would be wise. Let me just bring it down to 1. But when they do that, they have this really high sexual craving because they've been having sex with so many people. And now maybe they use a little bit of masturbation in order to bring their sensual desire down so they don't have so much craving for sex. Because if you know anything about dams, like structures that hold back water, one of the things that they do is when the water is building up higher and higher on the dam, it's threatening the dam. And these are usually multi-million-dollar structures. And one of the ways that they protect the dam is they open up the dam and they let the water out so that it reduces the pressure and it allows the water to flow, right? And then once the water's down, then they will close the dam again, right? And this kind of alleviates the pressure. Well, what you're going to notice is when you're eliminating something like sexual cravings in the mind, if you go a couple of weeks without sex, you might notice the pressure building up in the mind and you just feel like you want to have sex really bad. Well, if you use a little bit of masturbation, it can knock that down. It's like opening up the dam and protecting the dam. So now maybe you went 2 weeks without having sex and now you use a little bit of masturbation. But now maybe you go 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks without having sex and now you use a little bit of masturbation. And now maybe you go 2 months, 3 months, 6 months without sex. And now maybe you use a little bit of masturbation. So in this situation, you're slowly declining your sensual desire. And this is helpful for the mind. It's beneficial. So masturbation could be used in a helpful way. But it can also become obsessive, where somebody could be using masturbation extensively, maybe 10 times a day, 15 times a day, 20 times a day. And in this situation, their sensual desire is increasing and now is actually causing harm to this being who they are. So you need to be looking at how you're using masturbation. Is it decreasing your sensual desire or is it increasing it? And then you can see what would be wise and in what situations. Sex with animals is one of the things that's black and white. I imagine if somebody tried to do this, they could get injured, they could get diseases and illness because an animal can't give us consent to have sex with it. So this is something that is here that you guys can understand. Pornography is something that people sometimes ask me about. Pornography didn't exist in the way that we know it today during the lifetime of the Buddha, but we can see that pornography, if you go down that path, your mind kind of gets involved in this fantasy world. And now, even if you choose to come out of it, it's really hard to sometimes connect with an actual live human being to be able to have sexual relation. And sometimes it can't even feel as satisfying anymore because the mind has been deep down into this fantasy world. So what I would encourage you to do, if you're interested in intimacy and sexual contact, is go towards an actual real live human being and develop a relationship with that person to be able to have sex. When you go down to pornography, your mind's going to get trapped in that fantasy world, and it's really hard to come out of it and actually have satisfying sexual relationships afterwards. So if you have a certain amount of pornography that you're digesting now, you can actually eliminate that, and you'll see that your mind will be more clear, more focused, and more concentrated from having eliminated that craving. Do you guys have any questions on this precept? Questions? Yeah, get a mic. You get a mic, and you over there. Sorry, I don't know all your names, so... Sorry, I don't know y'all's names, so I just have to say you,
it's
you,
okay.
you.
I know in Thailand there are lots of massage that are sexual, but they say it's good for you. I don't know, what's your opinion on it?
Again, it all depends, right? If somebody was thinking about raping somebody, but instead they went and paid for something like that, that person is at least consenting to it, so it's less unwholesome karma. There's still unwholesome karma there, but it's less, right? So Thailand has everything and anything that you would like to get here, right? Because they're not going to, get rid of all that stuff. They understand that one of the ways that someone needs to extinguish a craving is to actually fulfill it. So they have everything and anything that you would like to get here, just like everywhere else.
So your opinion about paid sexual services is not that bad, right?
I didn't say that. It's still producing unwholesome karma, but if it's a matter of going off and raping somebody versus doing paid sexual services, I would say go do the paid sexual services. But now when somebody gets used to that and now they don't have the urge to go rape somebody anymore, now, okay, let's take care of the paid sexual services, and that person would be wise to extinguish that. So it's a matter of making wise decisions, and it's not always about moving to the perfect decision, because moving from a strong craving like wanting to rape somebody all the way over to having no sex at all, that's a very hard thing for the mind to do. So there's kind of like this gradual improvement that the mind can make to get to the best decision, which would be complete elimination of sensual desire. So there's the ability to gradually do that.
I have another question. It's like, because sex is type of energy in your body, how do you do when like you no longer have sex, right? Like, what do you do with your sexual energy?
There's not
like how do you orientate it? I don't know. What do you do with it?
Yeah, this is actually a misunderstanding. It's not actual sexual energy. It's not the body that's wanting the sex. It's the mind. It's all from the sensual desire. So that's what you're getting rid of. It's not actual sexual energy. It's actually the mind longing, yearning. It wants to be pleased. So what we do is we find a partner who's willing to stimulate our eyes, our ears, our nose, our tongue, our body, and our mind. And then the height of that is an orgasm, right? And we trust this person so much, and we care about this person so much, we're willing to get involved in this activity where we stimulate them and they stimulate us, and now there's this heightened experience where there's potentially an orgasm, right? So that's what's actually going on there. It's not really energy, it's just craving in the mind, a longing, yearning. So once you get rid of that sensual desire, your mind is actually quite peaceful, very, very peaceful, because as long as you have that longing, yearning in your mind, you're going to be looking and looking and looking, like where's my sex coming from? I want to find this somewhere.
Eliminate the thought is by kind of like doing meditation or being mindful of when the thoughts arise, right?
This is the Eightfold Path that has to be in place first, right? Because you need to understand where those discontent feelings are coming from. That's what right view is helping you to know. Then there's right intention, where you're practicing renunciation, letting go, harmlessness, and non-ill will. And then when you get into the mental discipline section, where you have that mindfulness, when you see this craving coming up, you then apply right effort to cut it off and let it go. The breathing mindfulness meditation and the generosity that we talked about yesterday, that's training your mind to let go of all craving, desire, attachment. So that's the generalized training that you're doing on a proactive basis. But then in the present moment, when you see with your mindfulness that the sexual craving is arising, if you're trying to eliminate it, and that's the choice that you've made, then you cut it off and let it go. And if you're having trouble with just working with the foundational teachings of the Eightfold Path, that's where the meditation to eliminate sexual cravings comes in. There's a meditation specifically designed to help you eliminate this. Because the reason why people are interested in sex is the sensual desire, and they're looking at another person, finding that person to be attractive, but that's because we're just seeing the outer layer of the body. But there's a meditation that helps you to be able to develop the unattractiveness of the body, where you can develop in your mind that this body is not attractive. And that's something that someone would choose to do when they're ready to actually do that. There's a different meditation, but the breathing mindfulness meditation, the generosity, the mindfulness, the cutting off and letting go, all that needs to be in place to help to generally train the mind before you bring in something like that. Mm-hmm.
My question, it's around the concern, compassion, being the concern for well-being. Mm-hmm. And when do you step in and help? Or when do you say, oh, this is this being's karma, and that's their situation? Because I understand that me wanting to step in and help is imposing my expectations of how I think they should want to feel, or like that. So there are times where you could help.
Sure. This is going to be a case by case basis. This is why you need to have that higher consciousness to look at the variables and decide in each situation. So if I'm walking down the street and maybe there's 10 people beating up one person and they all have guns and knives and baseball bats and metal tubes, it may or may not be wise for me to step in that situation. But if there's one person hitting another person, it might be wise for me to do that. Each situation's different. You have to figure this out. And that's why it's important to stay calm and move to a higher consciousness. And there's more variables than just those. There's other variables too. Like one time I was in a foreign country. I don't speak the language at all. It was the first time I'd ever been in that country. And I was in a public space. And this 8-year-old child was with his dad, and his dad slapped him across the face. I didn't see it, but I heard it. It was really loud, and it kind of echoed in the area that we were in. And I was surprised by this. But what am I going to do here? This child, I can't protect this child long term. I can't go communicate with the dad. It's not my place to step in and tell the dad what they should or shouldn't be doing. So you have to look at each one of these situations uniquely. And there's going to be unique variables in each situation of whether or not you should do something or not. And that's where I can't tell you it as a decision tree of these are the criteria where you would step in and these are the criteria where you wouldn't. But if you are eliminating your craving, your anger, your ignorance, you're eliminating your ego and all these other things, then you will figure out in what situations would be wise to step in. And that's where your own free will comes in.
You mentioned also yesterday that as an American, there's some amount of like the savior complex, and that like I could come in and I want to help these children or whatever it is. I want to help these people. And there is the ego as an aspect of that. But on the in addition to that, like if there are people who aren't able to ask for help, whether they're stuck in a situation like human trafficking, and they is it from the Buddhist point of view to say, well, that's their karma. Something happened in their previous lives that now they're in this situation, and it's such a big cycle that I, as just one person, probably can't help that much. And I'm wondering, like, for topics that people are passionate about that involve living beings, should we still volunteer in those areas?
In some cases you may, some cases you might not. It really comes down to your decision. But when we talk about passion, that's craving, desire, attachment. That passion, that burning, that desire to do something, and that will burn out. But when you make decisions through wise decision making, you can sustain that long term. So I have a real interest, a real goal and objective to be able to share these teachings, as I've shared before, that I have a real interest to share these teachings. And that'll never burn out. That's why I know that I'm going to do it for the rest of my life, because it's not coming from a passion. It's not coming from a craving, desire, attachment. But I'm also not indifferent to people's suffering and misfortune either. So I'm making these wise decisions to share the teachings with others. And then I do things like going to children orphanages and share food with them and help them and things like this. But each situation is going to be different, and you've got to figure out for yourself, does it make sense for me to contribute my effort here and help these people? Can I really be of help and be of service? Are they welcoming of my help? Or am I just inserting myself into this because of my own cravings and my own ego? And that's not going to produce wholesome results for you. Whereas if you're doing it and these people are welcoming you in to be able to help them, that's where you can be really effective. So what we were talking about yesterday is not to say you should never help anybody. It's to say that when these people welcome your help and they're interested in your help, that's where you can actually be helpful. But when we function through craving and ego and try to insert ourselves into somebody's life, that's where we can't actually be helpful to them because they're not interested in our help. So it's never like, oh, that's their karma, who cares? They got to deal with it themselves. That's like non-compassion. That's non-loving kindness. That's not the way that the Buddha would have taught. Instead, he's teaching you to make decisions to help if that's what you would like to do, but you're not responsible or obligated for these kinds of things. You need to look at each situation uniquely and decide in what situations would be wise for you to help and other situations would not be wise for you. And it's going to be a case-by-case basis based on many different variables. Okay, so now let's move to the fourth precept. The fourth precept is very straightforward. It's very easy to teach this one because we've already been talking about it a little bit. Here's number 4. It's abandoning false speech, refraining from false speech, a truth speaker, one to be relied on, trustworthy, dependable, not a deceiver of the world. This is what the Buddha said, right? Sometimes people translate this as no lying, right? That doesn't give you any information whatsoever. This is what the Buddha is teaching you. And he's explaining to you why it's important not to lie, because you would like to be trustworthy, dependable, reliable, not a deceiver of the world. Because if you tell lies, people are going to discover those lies. And now in a professional environment, they're not going to trust you. And when that great project comes up that can really advance your career, they're not going to staff you on that project because they don't trust you, right? Or if you've ever done a lot of lying, you know that your mind was obsessively trying to figure out one thing versus another, what you said to one person versus another. Whereas if you just always tell the truth, you have no issues. You can just always tell the truth. And the Buddha understood this so well that I included this other teaching here to be able to help you guys see this. This is where he's teaching his son. Sometimes people think that he left from his family and never came back, but he actually came back to the area where his family was, and his son ordains with him, his wife ordains with him, his stepmother ordains with him, lots of people ordain with him. So here he's teaching his actual son, and he's explaining to his son that it would be wise to not even lie when you're telling a joke, right? This is how closely the Buddha practiced this. If you can imagine this individual that is in classes that is teaching all this wisdom of how to move the mind to enlightenment, but on the side, he's telling jokes with lies in them, people wouldn't know whether to trust what it is that they're actually sharing in the classes. So the Buddha understood this natural law of karma so well that even when he told jokes, he didn't tell a lie. Now, you guys might not associate a Buddha as somebody who tells jokes, but a Buddha tells jokes, right? Like you guys see these pictures of him looking so solemn and serious and always meditating. A Buddha is an enlightened being. They're going to be joyful and happy. They're going to tell jokes, right? So even when he tells a joke, he doesn't tell a lie, right? So an enlightened being is going to be happy and joyful and cheerful. Their mind's going to be glad, right? They're not going to always be solemn and serious the way you see him in most of these depictions. So he tells jokes, but when he does it, he doesn't tell a lie. And normally, this takes a lot more work to tell a joke that is the truth, right? But because you're putting in more work and more effort, usually those jokes are more funny. So if you'd like to bring your practice up to this point, you're going to see a lot of benefits in it because you're going to need to cultivate more wisdom in your mind to tell jokes that are actually truthful. Sometimes when we tell jokes, we demean or diminish other people in the unenlightened state. That's what someone might do. Or you might demean or diminish yourself, or you might tell lies. And it's better to not do that, that you can tell jokes that are truthful, that are bright and uplifting. And you'll find that you have much better relationships with the people around you. So any questions on this one? No questions? Sometimes people ask me about white lies. Do you guys know about that? Should I teach you guys about that? Yeah? You have a question?
Very random, but are there any enlightened comedians out there?
I don't know of any myself, but there could be. I'm not sure.
They wouldn't tell, I guess. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So sometimes people ask me, like, well, what do I do if somebody is being chased by a soldier during a war and they run into your house and they're hiding under your bed? And the soldier comes to your house and says, where is this person? Are you supposed to then tell the truth? Right? So what I suggest people to do, and what I help you to understand, is telling the truth doesn't mean you tell everything you know, right? If a soldier came to my door and said, where is this person? And I know that they're hiding under my bed in my bedroom, I'm going to say, oh, are you looking for Barbara? Maybe we should look under the bush over there, right? I'm going to try to redirect this person to another place. I haven't told a lie. I just haven't told everything that I know. It's like, oh, you're looking for Barbara? Maybe she's at that bush. Let's go over there and take a look, right? I'm not actually lying. I'm just trying to redirect this person. Or sometimes people ask, like, what am I supposed to do if my wife comes to me and says, hey, honey, how do I look? Right? You're going out for a nice night and they're like, hey, how do I look? Am I supposed to tell her that she looks horrible? Like, what am I supposed to do? That would produce unwholesome karma, right? If you did that, right? So telling the truth doesn't mean you tell everything that you know. If you think your partner looks horrible, this is because of your own expectations, your own cravings. What this person is really looking for is they're looking for confidence. They're going out on the town, they're looking for confidence. So instead of telling them they look horrible, obviously they bought those clothes because they like them. What I would say is, you know what? I just enjoy spending time with you no matter what you wear. Let's go have fun, right? Or I would say, you know what? I think your smile is so beautiful. Let's just go have a good time, right? That's what I would say, right? So when you get to enlightenment, you'll be able to see beauty in everything, right? You won't need to be able to say, oh, you look ugly or you look horrible. This is not going to produce wholesome karma for you.
Do you have any favorite jokes?
I have simple jokes. I don't really have really big jokes. Usually my jokes are like in the moment. But there are some Buddhist jokes if you would like to know some Buddhist jokes. Yeah. We can talk later after class. Okay.
I have a question. Is like actually I like quite a lot to my parents because they're a bit controlling. And by example, for this holiday, they will ask me, how long is your vacation? Actually, it's 3 weeks, but I don't want to spend the whole 3 weeks with them. And if I say I'm going to Thailand, they won't be happy. And if I say I don't want to tell you, that would cause me troubles also. So I have to say, yeah, I have only 1 week.
I wouldn't have done that if I was you. So what I would have said is, Mom, don't worry. I'm a big girl. I'll be just fine. Because what's going on here, she's got an attachment, she's got a craving, or I'm assuming your mom, probably your dad too, right? So they've got an attachment, they've got a craving, they're attached to you, and they're forming their inner feelings based on you. So what I would have said in that situation is, Mom, no worries, don't worry, I'll be just fine, I'm a big girl. You taught me well.
They will wait for the answer though.
That's okay, just walk away.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, so now let's go to the fifth one, okay? The fifth one is super important because if you're not practicing this one, you're more likely to do all the others, okay? So this one is refraining from strong drink and sloth-producing drugs, substances that cause heedlessness, the basis for heedlessness. So when you're investigating the teachings of the Buddha and you come across something like this, if you don't know what the word heedlessness means, you're going to need to look it up. Right? And that's what I did. I didn't know the word heedlessness. I didn't know what it meant. I thought I know what it meant. I thought, pretty close. I figured out what it would be, but just to be sure, I looked it up. And this is what it says. Heedlessness is carelessness, thoughtless, inattentive, uncalm, unaware, or unmindful. So this is the way the Buddha teaches. He teaches in a timeless way. He's teaching in a way that if there's any substance that you put into the body that is going to produce unawareness or unalertness or unmindfulness in the mind, that this would be unwise. Because in order to get to enlightenment, you need right mindfulness. So putting substances into the body that cause heedlessness would be to take you in the opposite direction of enlightenment. So that's what he's teaching you here, is that it would be unwise to take any substances that cause heedlessness. If you go to a jail or you go to prison and you talk to prisoners and you ask them, why are you here? They'll tell you, like, I'm here for murder or I'm here for robbery or whatever like that. But if you really talk to them and you ask them, like, no, like, why are you really here? About 80% of them will tell you that they're there for substances because they would have never murdered that person if they weren't high on drugs. They would have never robbed that bank if they didn't have a drug habit, right? So it's really this particular precept that you're more likely to kill, to steal, to have sexual misconduct, and to lie. So that's why it's so important to make sure you're practicing this one, that you're not putting substances into the body that is going to promote this heedlessness, this unalertness, unmindfulness, unawareness. But here, there's some gray areas that you need to be able to look at and evaluate. This plant of marijuana, there's irrefutable evidence that it has medical benefits. There's studies that have been done with little children that would have seizures, about 20 seizures a day. And they give a little bit of CBD oil on the tongue, and they don't have another seizure for 6 months. Right? There's irrefutable evidence that this plant has medical benefits, but you need to be able to look at what you're using it for and how you're using it. There's two different parts to the marijuana plant. There's CBD and then there's THC. The THC is what's producing the high. So if somebody's going for heedlessness, they're going to be looking for a high THC. And they're usually going to be ingesting it through smoking. And this is going to cause harm to the lungs, right? If you're looking for the medical properties, you're usually going to be looking for a high CBD. And you might ingest it through an oil or an edible or something like this, right? But you need to make sure it's a real valid medical purpose, because if you're taking marijuana for stress or anxiety or something like this, that's not going to solve that. That stress and anxiety is coming from the craving, desire, attachment in the mind, and marijuana is not going to solve that. It's going to cover it up for a short period of time, and that's impermanent. If you'd like to get rid of your stress and anxiety, you're going to need to train your mind to eliminate craving, desire, attachment. So you can look at marijuana and decide for yourself, are you going for heedlessness or is it a true medical purpose, right? And this is where you can evaluate this and see for yourself. Cigarettes, there's no medical benefit to those whatsoever, and more people are figuring that out. If you currently smoke, that's where you're at now. But if you get off of the cigarettes, you're going to see more health coming to the body. You're going to see more clarity in the mind. Usually when you're eliminating something like this, you usually like to do it gradually and slowly. If you try to go cold turkey, the mind doesn't typically like that. So if I was smoking 20 cigarettes a day, I'd probably go down to 18 for like a week or so. Let the body and the mind adjust to that. Then I'd go down to 15 for a week or so. Let the body and mind adjust to that. Then go down to 12 or 10 and just gradually decrease it like this until eventually it's one day I might have one day I have zero. One day I have one day I have zero. And then gradually expand that. One day I have 1, 2 or 3 days I have zero, right? And now you can gradually move towards this, because whenever you introduce impermanence, the mind doesn't like it. It doesn't like change. So if you do it gradually like this, the mind almost doesn't realize what you're doing. And this will be really helpful for you. And you'll be able to have a sustainable choice and a sustainable decision to move off the cigarettes. And people have learned this more and more over the years, that there's nothing beneficial here. And with all the cancers that people were incurring, more and more people have moved away from it. But there's still people in the world that smoke. So if you smoke, don't feel guilty, don't feel shameful, but you can work to actively eliminate this. And the breathing mindfulness meditation, the generosity, is generally going to help you eliminate all cravings, desires, attachments. And now, having built up that type of practice, it'll make it easier for you to eliminate the cigarettes, because your mind's already knocking down its cravings, desires, attachments. So if you build up your eightfold path for a few months, you'll find that it's going to be easier to let go of cigarettes than it was potentially in the past. You're going to need to look at prescription medications, because there's some prescriptions that can actually be addictive. So if a doctor is prescribing you medication, I don't suggest that you blindly take that medication. It's better to research it and figure out, is it addictive or not? And if it's addictive, you might ask them, hey, can you prescribe me something different, right? But what you might come back with is that there is no other option. In some cases, there are options and they can give you something different. But if there's no other option, at least you have that information that this medication that you're about to start taking is addictive. And that way, take it for a short period of time, for the time that you need it, and then get off of it as soon as possible. So you're going to need to pay attention to that kind of stuff. You'd probably even like to look at your caffeine intake. If you're currently drinking caffeine or ingesting caffeine in any way, this is stimulating the mind, taking it up into this higher energy, and then over time, it's going to drop off. By the time you get to enlightenment, you'll have sustainable energy all day long, where you don't get tired, you don't get exhausted. You'll get sleepy where you need to take a sleep, but you won't get tired and exhausted. But you'll never be able to get to that if you keep relying on caffeine, because the caffeine is going to take the mind up here and then it's going to crash. And it never gives the mind the ability to build this natural energy that's sustainable all day long. So you might decide to look at eliminating your caffeine. And again, if you're going to choose to do this, you might choose to do it gradually. That's what I had to do. And I went through withdrawal symptoms, just like any other drug that you're going to detox from. You're going to need to go through those withdrawal symptoms of headaches and all these other things. So you might need to go to, for me, I was like 3 to 5 cups of coffee a day, big glasses of iced coffee. That's one of the reasons why I chose to move to Thailand. I was like, oh, coffee on every corner, right? This is great, And then once I realized what this stuff was doing to me, I had to gradually detox off of it. So I went down to, 2 glasses a day, 1 glass a day, 1 glass one day, no glasses the next day. And I just gradually expanded this all the way to the point where it'd be, 2 weeks with no coffee. And then I'd have a coffee. And then, 4 weeks without a coffee. And then I'd have one. Now, got all the way to 8 weeks without a coffee, and I eventually ended up having one, and that was the last one that I had, right? So you need to gradually move away from these things. You're going to need to pay attention to your sugar intake. If you take a lot of sugar, this can take your mind up into a high. We usually figure out that when we're children and we stop doing those kinds of things, but you'll need to pay attention to that as well. Sometimes people will tell you that psychedelic substances are going to help you to get to enlightenment. This isn't actually true. It's not possible to get to enlightenment as long as you're taking psychedelics. This is the way I think about it, is that psychedelics do kind of replicate some of the qualities that you're going to need to cultivate in order to get to enlightenment. By taking something like a mushroom or LSD or these kinds of things, it can create this introspection where you look inward. But you're going to need to develop that so that you can have that introspection all throughout your day. If you can only have that introspection when you're taking a substance, you never give the mind the ability to develop that. So if you're talking to your mom and you're in an argument and you need to be introspective, it can't be like, hey mom, hold on a second, I need to go drop this acid real quick, I'm going to be back and I'll answer your question in a moment, right? You can't do that kind of thing. You need to be introspective in the moment. So if you can only be introspective when you're taking psychedelics, then you're not developing the qualities that you really need. So can mimic some of these qualities. And the way that I think about it is like if you were window shopping and you were walking down the sidewalk and you were looking into the window of a store and you saw this beautiful handbag or this beautiful shoes in the store, and you really would like to go inside and touch it and feel it and maybe purchase it, but you can't because you're chained down to the sidewalk. This is essentially what one is experiencing when they're using psychedelics, that you can kind of see some of these qualities of enlightenment, but you can't ever really fully touch it and experience it because you're chained down to the sidewalk. So there's nothing about taking psychedelics that are actually going to assist you in getting to enlightenment. You're going to need to build those qualities through meditation and being introspective and that eightfold path. That's what's going to produce the qualities to get to enlightenment. So do you guys have any questions on this one, number 5? Yes, sir.
So in regards to caffeine, what about like tea or hot chocolate that have very little amounts of caffeine?
Yeah, what you're going to notice is once you start detoxing from caffeine and you get rid of it, your mind's going to become more sensitive to these things. That initially it might feel like it's no big deal, but over time, as you train your mind more and more, it's going to become more sensitive to it. I had this experience that I went to a coffee shop one time and I couldn't order anything. I was waiting for my son at school and I ordered a hot cocoa, and I was like, I'll order hot cocoa. That should be fine. And I didn't know that it potentially had caffeine in it. And I took a sip out of it. And I was like, whoa, it felt like jacked up like right away just from one sip. So I looked on the internet and it said it had 1/8 of the amount of caffeine as a coffee, right? So I used to drink 5 cups of coffee, big glasses of coffee a day. And here it was just one sip. That was 1/8 of what a coffee has. And it was like, whoa, I could notice it right away. So you're going to notice that your mind becomes more sensitive to it. But you could potentially use these things to help you decrease your caffeine. So like if someone was on like 5 cups of coffee a day, but they moved to like a tea, which has less caffeine, that might be their way of gradually decreasing their caffeine. And then eventually they're going to get rid of the tea as well, but maybe they just keep it around for a little while as they're decreasing their caffeine gradually. And there's other things too, like if somebody likes hot drinks, there's like lemongrass tea that doesn't have any caffeine at all, or ginger tea that doesn't have caffeine, or like there's this one restaurant I go to where I order turmeric tea. It doesn't have any caffeine. So if you like hot drinks and stuff like this, or even cold drinks, they have things that are similar, right? There's a place down the street that I get this soy milk drink that has bubbles in it and caramel and different things like this. So if you like sweet milky drinks, they have those kinds of things at different places that don't have caffeine in them. So you just need to seek those things out and look for them. And then you'll see that your mind can be more clear, more focused, because you're not ingesting anything that's causing heedlessness. Okay, yes, sir. Yeah.
Hello. Okay. So I just have a curiosity. If I happened to be an enlightened being and I happened to take one sip of a coffee without even knowing, I don't know, I'm taking my glass and I take the other person's glass and I take a sip and I already drank coffee. I didn't meant to do it, but I did it. Would I stop being unenlightened?
No, you wouldn't, because in order for there to be craving, anger, and ignorance in the mind, there would have to be intention, right? So if someone's have a craving for caffeine or craving for alcohol, they're then going to drink it because they're intending to do that, and that's what they want to do. But in this example, an enlightened being is just choosing to drink this particular drink. They didn't even know there was caffeine in it. So now as soon as they notice there's caffeine in it, they're like, whoa, they're not going to drink that anymore. That's going to be their choice because they understand the wisdom behind that it's unwise to produce heedlessness in the mind. So you're not going to stop being enlightened. Instead, your wisdom of these natural laws is going to be there to support you, and you'll choose wisely not to take that any longer. But because there was no intention behind it, you weren't intending to become heedless. It's just something that you sipped this drink, not realizing that that was the case, that it had some substance in it. Okay, I think that's all the questions. I don't see anything online either. So I would like to thank you guys for the great discussions we've been having. You guys have been asking very wonderful questions, great discussions with all of you guys to help you guys be able to see these natural laws more and more clearly. As we go forward in our retreat, I'm going to be sharing more and more details with you to help you guys see this. What we've been doing so far is we've been talking about the natural law of Karma in a lot of ways. So tomorrow, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to actually start off with loving kindness meditation, teaching you guys that. And we're going to do that because that's what's going to help you to understand how to eliminate anger, hatred, and ill will in the mind. But then after that, I'm going to be teaching you what is Karma and how does it affect me? Because we've been talking about the natural law of Karma all the way through, but now I'm going to actually go in and specifically talk about this natural law in a way to help you understand it even more so than you're already starting to understand it through things like the 5 precepts and the Eightfold Path and things like this. So we're going to talk about the natural law of Karma. I'm going to teach you about what is merit. This is a specific type of Karma that you're going to need to learn how to produce. And then in the evening, I'm going to be teaching you after our trip to the orphanage. This is the orphanage, by the way. After our trip to the orphanage, we're going to come back and do loving kindness meditation to give you guys a chance to practice it again since you learned it in the morning. But then I'm going to teach you guys about the jhanas. This is where you're going to really start getting into some detailed teachings about how to get to the first stage of enlightenment. All the stuff I've been teaching so far, you need in order to get to the first stage of enlightenment. But now we're going to start teaching specific teachings that are really going to help you to be able to get to that first stage of enlightenment. So enjoy your evening, whatever you choose to do, and perhaps I'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a lovely evening. Okay? Sawadee Kap, Sawadee Kap, Sawadee Kap.